I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Raven Sterling, and she lists herself as the head tree hugger. Raven started pulling English ivy for homeowners as a side job 4.5 years ago out of love and concern for trees and native plants in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She understood that diversity and significance of ecology in the area, created a business to eradicate invasive plants after recognizing the threats they posed. The business runs crews of specialized landscapers who use hand and gas-powered tools to remove and reduce invasive plants of the southern forest, primarily vines, shrubs, and trees. Raven Invasive Plant Management is now a thriving small business sought throughout North Carolina and beyond for mindful management of invasive plants without the use of chemicals. A proponent of native plants, Raven educates private landowners, businesses, community organizations, and HOAs on the benefits of planting native and the threat of invasives. Raven's
Thank you, Scott, and a big thank you to all the people at Marshall Library and Marshall Native Gardens. I really am embarrassed to say that I had not heard of the Marshall Native Gardens until my friend Carrie, you're going to hear from her, until she told me about this place. And so when I got a chance to come out and walk through with Carrie, I was blown away by what they've done here, and just so impressed, that there was this groundswell of, community that organized around this place and recognized the importance of native plants to the ecology of the region. And they do this work, and they do it as volunteers, right? So they just come out here and go at invasive plants and plant native plants and do all the good things to support the birds and the bees and the bats and the butterflies. So big thank you to them for all of their work. So if it's ready,
You should be
ready
good.
for me. Right here.
Was it not going through?
You have to go into presenter mode first.
It should be there.
Just a second here. Well, I'll start talking. So, who we are. So, as he said, I started this business about 4.5 years ago. Not really started a business. I mean, I just saw something that needed to be done. It was English ivy. I moved into a neighborhood in Asheville that was just eaten up with English ivy. So every day I'd drive home and I'd see the English ivy up in the trees and these giant vines, and I'd see the kudzu everywhere. And it's one of the most treed neighborhoods in the city of Asheville. And I was devastated. I mean, literally there were days I would cry as I would drive through it. And I would say, who's doing anything about this? Like, how is this happening all over Asheville, all over Western North Carolina, that we have these invasive plants that are killing trees, out-competing native plants? Someone has to do something about it. So a friend said, why don't you put a post on Nextdoor? Just tell people how terrible English ivy is. And I said, that's a great idea. So I did it, and 9 people contacted me just from that post on Nextdoor. It was the most commented on post on Nextdoor for 2 months. So when I would get that little summary email, it was like 156 people that commented on this post. It was really inspiring because many people didn't even know. They were like, oh my God, I had no idea that English ivy, hurt trees. I had no idea what was happening. Other people were like, yes, it's a terrible plant. I've been, dealing with it in my yard for years or whatever. So I started doing it on the side, just going out with my tools, these tools right here. I had cleaners, sloppers, all these little tools that I would go out and just deal with the English ivy and pull it up by the roots, and I was like, well, this isn't so hard. But then I started going into yards that had bittersweet like this, or kudzu like that, and I was like, oh my God, I could never, I could work for 3 or 4 hours and not walk the next day because my back was hurting or whatever. So then serendipitously, I was introduced to Jorge back here. Jorge is my crew leader, my friend, my right-hand man from El Salvador, and now we have an amazing crew of people, Jorge's crew, who understand the importance of the work that we're doing. They understand that it's meaningful work, that we're out there really doing something that matters, and they're fantastic. They can deal with stuff that I never, ever could have dealt with. So that's who we are. We're just tree huggers, nature lovers, advocates. We're just people who catalyst, we want to make change. We want to encourage people to do what they can in their yard, you know? If we all just did what we could do in our yard, it would make such a huge difference. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so I've already mentioned this. What we do is we educate, advocate, as much as we can. I love talking with people. When I go out to look at a job, which I do for free, I will spend usually up to an hour with people, just walking their land, talking about the plants, talking about the native plants, talking about the invasive plants, sharing as much information as I can with them about how we can deal with these plants without the use of chemicals, because that's really important.
Do you come to Yancey County?
So I try to come to Yancey County. I get called from all over because there aren't really a lot of people who do what I do. It's challenging being the only person who does all of that, you know? So Jenny could maybe tell you it took a while for me to get out to her property. I don't remember. Some people literally wait months for me to come and look at a job because they are passionate, as I am, about the work that we do without chemicals.
Well, it's been there for years, it could wait.
Except not the trees. So, the most important thing is that we practice mechanical methods, and that word is even adulterated, in this work that I do, because sometimes people will say, we do it mechanically. And then I go to the presentation and they're talking about using chemicals, and I'm like, that's not mechanical. So what mechanical means to me, I'm not bringing in big equipment, because big equipment is not good for the soil. It compacts the soil, it degrades, you know, ecology. I see big equipment as weed killers, quite frankly. So what we're using are small tools, like you're gonna see around here, and I'll talk about them a little bit more later. So who we do it for, this is important for me because I don't just do it for clients. Actually, that's not why I started doing this at all. I do it for the trees, I do it for the native plants, for the birds, the bees, the bats, and the butterflies. That's what I like to say. That's who I work for. So we also do this work for private landowners like yourselves, HOAs, and occasionally businesses and nonprofits. And in terms of this private landowner part, I just want to mention a really interesting statistic that I heard when I listened to Doug Tallamy speak. Carrie and I saw him speak, maybe some of you did recently. He mentioned that about 85% of the land in the United States is owned by private landowners. So if you go online and you look up, how do I deal with English ivy? How do I deal with oriental bittersweet? How do I deal with, you know, whatever? 9 times out of 10, they're gonna have one little sentence that says you can do it mechanically, and then they're gonna have this much information on what chemicals you can use. Now, the reason for that, I figured out over the past few years of doing this work and going to conferences like the North American Invasive Species Management Association, of which I'm a member, is that this conversation is being led by large land managers, okay? The conversation is led by the Forest Service. The conversation is led by the Park Service, by BLM, you know, by all of these organizations that have giant parcels of land. And they're gonna say, we could never get out there and deal with tools. We can never deal with tools. We have to use chemicals. But they're doing a disservice to all of you, because if you only have an acre or even 5 acres or 10 or 20 or whatever, that can be managed mechanically without chemicals. So if they're not making that more of a conversation, they're doing all of us a disservice. Because what I've also learned lately, I had the pleasure and privilege of going to Omega Institute and attending a workshop with Dr. Vandana Shiva. Do any of you know who Dr. Shiva is? Well, I encourage you to look her up. So she's an activist from India. She's probably 70 at this point. She's at the forefront of the no GMO movement. She's at the forefront of saving seeds movement. She has a really awesome documentary called The Seeds of Vandana Shiva that talks about her work. She's a really passionate advocate, and more than anything, she's a child of the earth. And what I learned from her was that they've done a lot of research on the use of chemicals like glyphosate. And they have found that when glyphosate is used, even mindfully, that 60% of the beneficial organisms in the soil are wiped out. Okay, so the chemical companies will tell you, oh no, it's a systemic chemical. It just stays in the plant. The only thing is the chemical companies don't know anything about the web of life that is the soil. that we live on, that we all depend on for life. So if we continue poisoning the soil with these chemicals to fight plants, we're only poisoning ourselves. And what we're doing is basically rendering much of the soil on the planet unusable for us and for the web of life that we depend on. So we do it with tools. Okay, so again, he mentioned it, the primary plants that we deal with are shrubs, woody vines, and trees. Now, if you get the invasive plants of the Southern Forest book by the Park Service, or I'm sorry, Forest Service, they're gonna go into grasses, forbs, like they have several categories of invasive plants, and I think I have those on here somewhere. So this is the book, which you can get online. You used to be able to find a lot of these in print, but unfortunately they don't print it anymore. So you can go online and get this information, but my only caveat, whenever I put this out or talk to people about it, is it's great for helping you identify these plants, but without exception, they recommend the use of chemicals. Without exception. So I'm here to say, use it to help you identify plants, but don't follow their advice to poison our soil as you try to deal with them. So the primary plants that we deal with, although we deal with a lot of the invasive plants of the Southern Forest, we're focusing on these right here. And some of the grasses, which I'll mention also. But in our area, the trees that we deal with primarily are tree of heaven, mimosa, paper mulberry, we're gonna talk about that one, colonia. Those are the main ones. Russian olive, autumn olive is another one. It says tree, I see it more as a bush here, but I mean, I guess it could be considered a tree. And then the shrubs, thorny olive, autumn olive, well, that's there. Burning bush, oh my God, burning bush. Does everyone here realize how invasive burning bush is and that you should never buy it and plant it? Please. Let's see what else. Privet, of course, that's a terrible one. Bush honeysuckle, nandina, which is heavenly bamboo. Do y'all know nandina, heavenly bamboo? Okay, do you know that kills birds?
The berries kill birds?
Absolutely. So there's a story, a school in Georgia planted, they had a landscaping company come in, and they planted nandina all around school, all around school. Now, a flock of cedar waxwings saw berries. Now, cedar waxwings don't know the difference between a nandina berry and an American hollyberry, which is their native food. So a whole flock of them descended on the nandina outside school. And their habit is not to just eat a couple of berries and fly off. They eat everything, and then they fly off. Well, this time they didn't fly off. They ate every berry on the nandina, and they all fell dead to the ground. You can go into any garden center around here today and buy nandina. Please don't. And the problem is that in nurseries, they may know plants to a certain extent, but they don't know where the plants come from. Very often, they don't know what their effects are on the ecology of our region. I'll share a story that was really devastating. Yesterday, I went to a beautiful Rich Cove. Is that what it's called, Preston? Rich Cove?
Yeah.
Rich Cove. I was thinking I didn't have the right first word, but a Rich Cove. So it means it doesn't get sunlight, and it's incredibly beautiful, moist, diverse. There are amazing plants there. So there was a home site that was carved out, up in this forest. And so then, of course, a lot of sunlight is getting in from the trees that they cut down. Amazing native plants like surrounding this home site. But from the time I pulled out to the road and then all the way up the driveway, all I saw were non-native invasive plants. So all in the beds, all in the yard, everywhere. And then I'm able to show the homeowner where the spirea has spread itself down into the woods. Where the invasive hosta, you might not know there's an invasive hosta, where this hosta was planted in one place and is now going into the woods. So over and over and over, I'm seeing all these plants in their yard, and I'm telling the guy about them, and he goes, oh my God, he goes, the people who lived here for 20 or 30 years, and they were so proud of their native plants in their yard. And I'm not sure if I should say, I'm gonna say, he said painters. He said, they would tell us that they got all the plants from painters, and painters said all of these plants were native. And I'm like, I don't know if they misunderstood, I don't know, I've never been to painters, I've heard about it, I'd love to go. But what I heard from him was that the homeowners had gotten all of their plants from painters, they believed all of them to be native, and almost every plant in that landscape was a non-native invasive plant. That was spreading itself into this beautiful, rich cover. That's hard for me to see, you know, it's hard for me to see because this is one yard where they called me for poison ivy. And they wanted me to look at the invasive plants that might be there, you know, but think about, that's 1 in 1,000, I don't know, 1 in 2,000 who has a yard like that in our forest. That doesn't know, they don't know, they know not what they do. So going back to the trees.
Ray, can I insert something?
bet.
So I'm Carrie Blair and I'm going to speak on trees and non-native plants in an hour. When I visited the Great Smoky Mountains to see the spring wildflowers, in front of the hotels, in front of every restaurant was Nandina, crepe myrtle,
Burning bush.
everything from the wrong side of the world. Excuse me, you're in the richest botanical area in North America.
That's right.
Excuse me. And what you get is total ignorance.
It's
They
ignorance.
just have not known any better.
That's right.
They chose the wrong plants. The Nandina in Northern Virginia where I live was the most frequent plant you would see in front of any restaurant.
Yeah.
Because they basically can stay green except in February.
Yeah.
They may drop their, they green, but they also go off into your woods.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
be
Yeah.
cautious.
Thank you
And
so
and
much.
be informed.
And it's true, be informed, that's the number one thing, like just because you can buy a plant in a nursery, doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. Good point.
Speaking of painters now, which I love, they have their native plants identified in red.
Great, good, so I, sounds like they probably
And they don't-
need some changes.
They do sell non-native
Sure,
plants,
yeah, and
but
most
they
nurseries do.
identify their natives and
Yeah.
they sell a lot of natives.
That's fantastic, that's a good start, you know, it's a good move in the right direction.
And they grow most of what they have there.
Yes, wonderful. And I have nothing bad to say about them, you know, but I buy plants from local nurseries. And I am frustrated because I see that they are still selling invasive plants in the southern forest. A really good example, which I was gonna talk about in a few minutes, but I'll talk about now, is Chinese silvergrass, this campus. Do y'all know what that plant looks like?
Oh,
yes.
So you can drive through Asheville right now, through anywhere in western North Carolina and see it all along the roadsides, along the railroads. I mean, it's everywhere, it's everywhere. And it is the most flammable thing that I have seen outside an old Christmas tree. Have you ever burned an old Christmas tree? It goes up like, well, we dug out some miscanthus at home and we put it out, you know, down near a fire pit. And one night we're like, let's burn this stuff, right? So we burned the miscanthus and I took a video. It's on my Facebook page. So if y'all go to Raven Invasive Plant Management on Facebook, you can find that video. It exploded. And I mean, the flames were probably 10 feet high in the air. So people plant this grass all around their houses and it has gone rogue everywhere. Because when you plant it in your yard and it goes to seed and the wind blows, then it's going in your neighbor's yard too. And the fires that just happened in Hawaii, you've heard about that? The reason they were so devastating is because first of all, an overpopulation of deer, because the natural predators have been wiped out, imagine that. So the deer are going in, they're eating all the native, you know, understory plants. And then they had an invasive plant problem. So many of these areas were covered with invasive grasses, not miscanthus, but other invasive grasses. So when the fires came, they no longer had a functioning, healthy ecosystem in the understory. What they had was a bunch of invasive fuel for a fire, and we have it here too. And while we live in a temperate rainforest today, with global warming, it might be less and less of a rainforest. And when it dries up, and we've had droughts here since I've lived here in the summer, where we don't get rain for a while. And when that happens, and somebody throws their cigarette out the window into a field of miscanthus, we're gonna have a problem. So these plants are not only detrimental to the trees, the native understory, but they're detrimental to all of us too, yes.
I had read somewhere that if you were burning miscanthus, that you should take the seed heads off, because as you burn it, the seed heads will go up
That's
and
right.
spread. and
That's right.
Plant themselves.
Thank you for making that point. So we dug this out before it went to seed. What I encourage people to do if they have miscanthus in their yard and they can't deal with it right now, you know, we're gonna come there and deal with it at some point. I tell them, just go out and cut the seed heads off, get a bag, and this is the same, if you've got a burning bush out there, if you've got, you know, Nandina and you can't dig it out right now, just go out with some loppers, hand pruners, whatever you have, cut the stuff off that produces seeds or the seeds that are there, put them in a bag. Don't burn them, don't put them in your compost pile. Don't take them to the Riverside stump dump, okay? Don't take them to places where they make mulch. So I didn't plan to go into this right now, but I love when it just flows, you know? So we have stump dumps around here. Unfortunately, we do not have any certified weed-free facility. We also don't have any certified weed-free nurseries. So this is one of the things that the North American Invasive Species Management Association is working on. Gravel yards, all those places, if they're not certified weed-free, they are likely spreading invasive plants. It is one of the top ways that they get spread. So if you've got a stump dump and people are bringing that crap in here all day long, truckload after truckload after truckload, they're not checking it. Are there invasive plants on here? Is this just brush? You know, they don't care because they're getting paid for you to bring it in there. And then they grind it all into mulch and then you pay them to take it out of there by the truckload. And then you take it home and you put it in your yard and then, you know, a few months later, a year later, you got 5 different invasive plants coming up in mulch. I've seen it. I've seen it.
I worked in the horse community for my entire working career till I was 7. I heard about a barn who bought shavings for their stalls. They came from black walnut. And they literally killed the horses who were bedded on black walnut wood chips.
Yes.
So
Thank
you
you.
really need to know about
People need
plants.
to know, people
and
need
their
to know about
consequences.
plants. And that reminds me also of buttercup, okay? So fig buttercup is also an invasive plant. It's not one that we're really dealing with because I mentioned we're dealing with these things because they look like this, okay? There are plants, if you got Japanese steelgrass in your yard, you can go out there, if you can lean over or get someone who can, you know, you can go out there and pull that so easily. These things, on the other hand, you need more hay in the screw, right? So that's why we deal with these things because, you know, little things, you don't want to pay us to do that. This year, I was really, my eyes were open to all the fig buttercup. So pretty little yellow flowers, you'll see it all over horse pastures, right? It's toxic to horses, to dogs. If your dog goes out and eats the fig buttercup, they could die from that. It is a toxic plant. It is also invasive. It's all over pastures. What I saw this year, I can only assume that there are people who just, you know, moved to the area, dreamt of having horses. They bought this beautiful land and they're like, let's put a couple of horses out there. They know nothing about what's growing there. They put the horses out there. I'm like, if they eat all of that buttercup, they're going to die. They're going to die. And people just they don't have that knowledge. You know, we just think that life is just gonna sustain itself and let's just let nature take its course. Well, the problem is that isn't nature. Well, I guess we're part of nature, but that's not a good way to look at Mother Nature. We brought these invasive plants here from halfway around the world. This is what globalization has done for us. Since we started moving around the world in boats, men who were on those ships and who were traveling to Japan or to wherever would see this plant there and they're like, oh my God, we don't have that plant back in Virginia. I'm gonna get this for my sweetheart. I'm gonna bring it over, you know? This is part of how it happened. Japanese stiltgrass, which is one of the grasses that we deal with, it was used as packing material for pottery. Okay, so it's an invasive plant for us. They were packing pottery in it. And then what happened is, you know, the ship comes into New York, the pottery comes in, they start unloading the pottery, they just throw the grass out behind the warehouse. Now we have Japanese stiltgrass all over the country invading our forests. I mean, it's a blight. I wanted to mention paper mulberry real fast, which is a tree. I have only seen this on 2 job sites, 3 in West Asheville. When I first saw the tree, I was like, what in the world is this monstrosity? What I was so like shocked by was the fact that there was this giant tree, and then I could see a smaller one over here and a smaller one over here. And as I'm walking through the yard, there are basically like the roots of the tree that are running along the top of the ground through this woman's bed. And you can follow them along, and here's another one popped up from the root. Go along, there's another one. There's another one. And I'm like, what in the world is this tree? So I called my friend at the Forest Service. Well, first I ID'd it, and it said paper mulberry from China, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. And so I called my friend at the Forest Service. You ever heard of paper mulberry? Yeah, I've never heard of it. Like, look it up, because I just found it in West Asheville. Called an arborist friend of mine who's an ISA certified arborist. TJ, you ever heard of paper mulberry? He's like, no, I've never heard of it. I'm like, look it up, because it's in West Asheville. So my friend at the Forest Service checked with other people in that office. No one had ever heard of it. It's here in Asheville, and it's going to seed. It's like spreading itself through the roots. It's unbelievable. So if you have a tree, I wouldn't think that it would just, be up in a forest unless someone planted it. But if you have a tree that looks like a mulberry, it has these 3 like different shapes of leaves, just ID it. But here's a dead giveaway. If you see things running along top of the ground, other trees, it's probably the invasive paper mulberry. So let's see here. This is just like a shot of, a more residential kind of job that we did removing English ivy. English ivy is the easiest plant we deal with. I tell people that all the time. It's the one that started me in this work. Like I said, it's easy for me to go out there and pull up an English ivy. It's a shallow rooted plant. It just has one main root and a bunch of adventitious roots that kind of hold it in place. What happens if you sever that? So people are like, I'm just going to take a weed eater to that English ivy, or I'm just going to mow over it, What happens when you do that is everywhere that you sever that plant, those adventitious roots set root. They turn into real roots. So you might have had like one vine, that you could just kind of roll up and get back to the root, take it out. Now you might have 5,000. And it's not the thing to do. So you wanna get back to the main root of that plant and get it out by the roots, which usually, honestly, I could pull out roots of English ivy by hand with vines that big. I can do it because it's so shallowly rooted, unlike some of these other things. But then when you're dealing with English ivy like this, or this, or this, and so people are like, oh, that's a tree with a vine on it. I'm like, no, that's English ivy. Those are English ivy vines, every one of them. They're vines. So when you're dealing with something that big, might take a little more. One thing though about English ivy, once it gets that big, which is awesome, if you cut it, which a couple of these, that one over there, I think I cut myself with a pole saw. Jorge and Cree did these, but if you cut that vine when they're that big, the plant will die. So generally, if it's a smaller of any of these, you have to get the root out, because just cutting it won't kill it. But because that ivy is so mature, it's put so much energy into branching out and producing millions of berries that have millions of seeds. All that energy has gone into the rest of the plant, so it can't recover from being cut. Smaller vines of just about any of these invasive plants can. So you have to get them out by the root. Now, another thing about dealing with English ivy like this, because you're only gonna find big vines of English ivy like that on a tree or a fence, you're gonna find it on a structure. It's not gonna be on the ground like that, because the thing with the English ivy is it has to grow up into the tree canopy. It has to get enough sunlight. It has to steal enough moisture. When it's covering the ground, it takes most of the rainfall. You see all those leaves? It's a very thirsty plant. So it takes most of the rainfall. It's also taking nutrients from the soil. So it's depleting the soil, literally turning it into sand. I have a job site in North Asheville where this beautiful little patch of woods between 2 houses, the only nature left there, And it was covered with 10 different invasive plants. You couldn't even walk in there. Multiflora rose, wisteria, that big around, English ivy, I can't even remember them all. So many plants, but English ivy covering the ground. That soil should have been dark, moist, rich soil, you know. We pulled all the English ivy out, it was like sand. I mean, it's the color of this garbage can right here. That's the color of the soil. I mean, you can just pick it up and it just runs through the fields. There's nothing left because the English ivy took everything from it. So back to my point, you're only gonna find these big vines growing up something. So don't just get out there with a, something to start hacking at it or a chainsaw and start, cutting at it if you don't know what you're doing. Don't hire your gardener, your landscaper, your whomever works in your yard. Don't say, hey, go over there and, deal with that English ivy vine on the tree. Because I've gone to 100 job sites where they're like, yeah, well, we went out there and tried to deal with the English ivy on this tree, and they've hacked into the tree. They've cut through the cambium layer of the tree with their chainsaw, with their axe, with whatever. And when you cut through the cambium layer of a tree, it's like an untreated wound on us. It's a living organism. And when you cut it and you don't heal it, you open it up to bacteria, fungus, all manner of organisms that can go into that tree and end up killing it. So you're out there trying to do something good, you realize the vine is bad, but if you don't know what you're doing, then you could be doing more harm than good. So if you're gonna cut a big vine on a tree, and so often they're girdling, Jorge, would you come up and help me? I realize not all of you can see these samples, so just wanna pull them out a little. Can you bring this one out so they can see this one? Yeah. So what often happens is that it's not just one vine, it's many, right? So this is typical when you have mature ivy on trees. It girdles the tree because it's just vines growing up on every side and they fuse together. They're just growing together. So when you're cutting something like that, like I know because I've cut enough of them with a pole saw, I can slow down as I get, pretty deep in there and I can feel it. I can feel it when I go through that vine. And you need to stop. But people who aren't mindful, don't see a tree as a living organism, they're just not doing their job, they're very likely to do more harm than good. Okay, let's see here. This is a really cool project. This is the first that we did of this kind of scope. You could not even walk into this area. This is in West Asheville, kind of behind the taco place, Taco Billy, like back in that neighborhood. And this could be beautiful patch of woods. And it looked like this. I mean, literally couldn't even walk in there. And so we went at this project for a long time, this before I had Jorge. So just myself and, some other people about like me going out there dealing with this. And her vision was that she loves permaculture, hugelkultur. She wanted to put some hugelkultur beds in. This was her previous garden, and she wanted to, expand it into this area. So that these are wood chips that you see on the ground. Unfortunately, some of the trees she decided to cut down. But I can tell you that the trees that were left there are a hell of a lot better off than they were when this was the situation. Okay, so I want to mention some invasive plants that maybe you don't know about or can't imagine that they would be. Butterfly bush. Who has butterfly bush in their garden? Do you love it? Yes. All right, here's why you shouldn't. So we have butterfly bush, and it was planted at some point. I don't know, maybe 1, 2, or 3 of them were planted. Over the past year, we've probably removed 50 baby butterfly bushes, and there are still several to go throughout the property. So, they go to seed, they blow, the wind blows, and then you got more butterfly bushes. And here I'll just kind of bring in a little, something about native plants. So part of the beauty of native plants is that many of them are host organisms. So you know what that means? So some butterfly lands on it, lays its eggs, the caterpillars grow on it. you know, and then they're food for the birds, right? They support the web of life. So native plants are an integral part of our ecosystem. They do many, many things. They have deeper roots, you know, they provide benefits for us, many benefits. They're part of life here. So they're hosts. When you plant non-native plants, this is part of the issue with them, they're not hosts because they're not part of our ecosystem. So that means they're not helping any organism grow. They're not helping the caterpillars, they're not helping the butterflies. In the case of butterfly bush, what they're actually doing is luring those pollinators and those beautiful butterflies out into the open, over to that butterfly bush for the birds that eat them to find them. You know, whatever their predators are, it's just bringing them out into the open without actually giving a whole lot back to us, other than the beauty. And beauty is a gift, obviously, and they smell great. But they're not helping us, they're not supporting life. The only thing that I have seen posted on a butterfly bush is the invasive praying mantis from China.
It's an invasive praying mantis.
Oh, yeah, there's also an invasive earthworm
Oh, I know.
that absolutely decimates the soil, decimates it. So this pest, the praying mantis from China, that you could probably go online and buy today as food for your snake or whatever. But then the thing is, when it gets loose, it's gonna kill everything indiscriminately. So, yeah, and we have hummingbirds. So what I have seen is that those praying mantis will live on that butterfly bush and they will come alive. And then the butterflies and the bees and all that stuff come over and then they get eaten. So that's why we don't like butterfly bush. So there are ferns like autumn fern. I can't even tell you how many times, and I am embarrassed to say it, how many times I bought autumn fern from a nursery and planted it for people. Because I thought, autumn fern, oh, of course, she's growing it, it's gotta be a great fern, right? It's not a native fern. So we have incredible native ferns here, incredible native ferns. We need more of those. What happens is with something like autumn fern that comes from somewhere else, that spreads itself, it can end up spreading itself and outcompeting those native ferns that are a critical part of our, of the ecology of the region. Florida anise, this is another one, I love that plant. Anyone know that one? It smells good, it's beautiful, I'm like, oh my God, I love this plant. Well, it is native to Florida, but bringing it here and planting it here, it also spreads itself, it has the potential. So these plants have not been listed, okay? These plants are not currently listed, to my knowledge, as a non-native invasive plant. However, I can tell you that they are, and at some point, I can't imagine they won't be. The hosta that I mentioned earlier, I can't remember the name of it right now, and I apologize for that, but y'all just search it up. It has purple flowers on it. It'll be like purple with white streaks in it. I first heard about it just a couple of years ago. And hostas are a commonly traded plant, right? People were like, hey, come take some of the hosta in my yard. I have so many of them. And I have seen, first I saw on a job site that the woman said, have you ever seen the invasive hosta? I said, I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it. She's like, come here. So we walk over to her woods, and I mean, her woods, I can see from like here to that, you know, the woods over there. As far as I can see, the only plant growing on that understory is hosta, covering the forest floor. The plant itself is this tall. It was blooming when I was there, so with the blooms, it was like this tall. There's not a trillium, there's not a maidenhair fern, there's not a, you know, insert beautiful native plant here that is gonna be able to come up underneath a sea of hosta that are that dense. Same thing with burning bush. I drove up to some woods one day, I was just driving away from a job site, and I see a line of giant burning bush along the driveway, right? As I'm going this way. So then when I'm driving back, I look over purposefully, I look over at the woods just before the driveway with a giant burning bush. And this was like February. And I look over in the woods, green everywhere. Everything in the understory is green. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what is that? I know it's none of the native plants because they're not all green and filling the forest right now. So I pull my truck over and I cross the road. And sure enough, every freaking plant out there was a burning bush. And it was from those 3 big burning bush that people had planted up there in their driveway that they had no idea would just spread and spread and spread into the woods. So these plants are aggressive. This is another good book. You can probably find it online, USDA, Department of Agriculture, New Invaders of the Southeast. You know, they're trying to kind of stay on top of this stuff. But it's another one that's gonna recommend use chemicals. So again, use it for ID purposes, but don't go on that. So in favor of native plants, this is a really awesome little handout. It's kind of like a business card size. Anyone have this from Mountain True? Bob Gale, lovely, lovely man. He just retired from Mountain True, but he put this little thing together, got a grant to do it, and it opens up and expands out, you know. And so it has the invasive plant and then it has native alternatives. You like English ivy, try these plants instead. It's a really, really awesome little guide, and I just encourage you to see that anywhere to grab it. So native to where and when, okay? So we can talk all day long about what is native, what is a native plant. So people will like call the Florida anise. Well, this is native. And it is, but it's native to Florida. Mahonia, Oregon grape. I bet there are some nurseries probably within, you know, 500 miles of here that sell Oregon grape and tell you it's a native plant. Well, it is to Oregon and Washington State, not here. Here it's an invasive plant. So if something says native, you can't just take, because now people are like, oh, native plants, let's just say they're native plants. And they are to somewhere, but you need to know native to where and when. So if you really care about the ecology of the region, you want to shoot for having 80% of the plants in your area or in your yard native plants. Okay, that's what Doug Tallamy's research has shown at the University of Delaware, that if 80% of the plants in your yard are native, you are a functioning part of the ecosystem. But if it's more than that, you're probably not. Because you're degrading the ecosystem, you're, you know, doing all the harmful things. Buying from reputable nurseries. Now, I buy from local nurseries, like I said, some of them are friends, they're friends. They love plants, but that doesn't mean that they really know everything they should know about the plants. One of my favorite nurseries still sell on this campus, okay? The nursery that I buy plugs from, lovely native sedge plugs, native grass plugs, also sells plugs of this campus. Okay, so they don't always know, you know, they're just people who love plants. And just because we love plants doesn't mean we know, like, that we know their role in the ecosystem, you know, what they can potentially do. So I just encourage you, if you want to be a mindful steward of your land and this beautiful, beautiful mountain home that we have here, as Gary mentioned, is the most ecologically diverse, the most biodiverse area. Definitely in the eastern United States, one of them in the country. It's incredible. I feel so fortunate to live here and to be part of it. And we all should. We should all understand how important it is and how special it is and how rare the plants in these forests are. We have rare medicinal plants that are only available in a few places in the world. And right now they're being outcompeted because we're not conscious of the role of these invasive plants and what they're doing. So that's my work here. Understand, you know, just because you're buying from a nursery that is a great nursery, you should still understand your plants. You know, just because you hire a landscaper, you know, from a big company or whatever, or a designer or whatever, you know, I'm not saying anything bad about them. I'm sure they're great at what they do, but they may lack the knowledge. They may just not have the knowledge. They're not doing anything on purpose. All the master gardeners that I've walked into their shit shows in people's yards, and I'm sorry, but I sometimes curse because it needs to be done, you know? Some of the worst places that I have seen, the people were so proud to say a master gardener lived here. So for 20 years, they have been planting all these plants here. And the yard is full of 2,000 baby burning bushes, English ivy like that went on the end because that came from a master gardener's yard. So the point is, just because somebody is working with plants doesn't mean that they understand invasive plants and native plants and why native plants are so important.
I'd like to recommend that something I've learned through my work at Virginia Native Plant Society is that change needs to come from the bottom up sometimes, not the top down. So requesting native plants at your nursery, telling them that you would prefer to see a great variety of natives rather than those same old non-native invasive Asian plants that, you know, people have relied upon for too long. So in Virginia, each of our chapters made recommendations for their ecological region, whether it was coastal, plain, Piedmont, mountain, et cetera. And they recommended plants that they thought were attractive, useful, and ecologically correct. And then they asked people to go to nurseries and ask for these.
Yes. Perfect. We got to do more of that. Absolutely. That's the way you make change. You know, I go into a place, Earth Fair. I went to Earth Fair a while ago. I was so happy that it was bought back and reopened here in Asheville, still owned by somehow this Canadian company is going to be part of it. So I walk up there, they got freaking baskets of English ivy out front. I about lost my mind. First of all, I went there and talked to a couple managers, and he's like, well, I can't take anything off the floor without getting approval from corporate office, and I can't get in touch with them today. So I said, tell you what, I'm gonna buy every one of those English ivy baskets out there so nobody else can. I spent $130 on baskets of English ivy. And you know what I did with them? I sat them out in my yard and I just watched them die. It got tape for them to die, and they finally died. And after talking to these people, like, I couldn't believe it. I go there like a couple of months later and there's more freaking English ivy out there.
Sold out.
So we all, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Oh my God, I got a funny story, and then I'm gonna have to rush through this presentation. So yesterday I'm driving through West Asheville, and I see a woman pushing a shopping cart. And what the hell do you think I see inside? But handmade wreaths covered with. Oh yeah. Mature berries, they're popping open. So I pull my truck over. I had to. I can't drive like that. So I pulled my truck over and I said, hey there, how you doing today? She's like, oh, I'm good, honey. You know, and I can tell she's most likely homeless. And I said, you know, looks like y'all are making some wreaths, you know, and I said, do you know what that plant is that is on that wreath, you know? And so I educated her a little bit. I said, and I even told her, I said, I would buy every one of them if I knew that you wouldn't go out and make more. But I knew she would,
Yeah.
so I did it. I'm like, you know, so I just tried to educate her a little bit. You know, and I moved on, but y'all are gonna see that this holiday season, and this is an opportunity for every one of us to educate other people. When you see the English ivy at your local garden center, say, do you see how devastating this plant is to our mountains? When you see somebody selling a wreath with Oriental bittersweet on it, do you know what this plant can become?
If you go over to the farmer's market, it's all there.
And they can't do it, like, they have, that is against the law, actually. And they've been called in there before, so I'm happy to do that, and I might try, I can't go over there today, because I'm heading to a conference tomorrow. But the other thing, nursery stock can harbor invasives. I've seen this, like, you get a container plant, it has some seeds in there, you plant something, and then you have an invasive plant. So when you buy container plants from a nursery, check them out. When you plant them, you get some mulch from somewhere, keep an eye on it. You know, just make sure that you're not bringing invasive plants in with your nursery stock. Oh, going the wrong way. Upside down here. Okay, okay, we'll say this one real fast. So I already mentioned mulch, gravel, forage is another way that invasive plants get spread. So if you're bringing in forage for your horses or whatever, you don't know where it came from, it could have invasive plants in it. And if they're eating it, then the seeds are going out the other end, you're bringing invasive plants onto your plant. Another way, this is one I bitch about all the time, equipment, big equipment. This is how the majority of these horrible invasive plants have been brought into our mountains, because we carve out a road, graders come in with their big equipment, we carve out a home site, they come in with their big equipment. North Carolina is not conscientious at all. Many states have strict laws that you can't bring big equipment onto a job site without cleaning the treads and all that. North Carolina, they don't know. So they can bring all that stuff in, and I see it because I see it on the home sites. You know, it's not in the woods, it's along the roads that we carved in. It's the home site. And people say, oh, well, I just think the birds spread it there. It's like the birds take over after the equipment brings it in and the plants go to seed. Then they eat it and they spread it. But equipment is I'm gonna go the number one way, because that's what I see. All right, so gotta run through this. Know your plants, use native alternatives wherever possible. Watch out for hitchhikers. I go through places sometimes and I'm near the end and I look and I've got seeds all over my pants. You know, not necessarily one of these plants, but it's another weed that we don't want to spread anywhere. So it's really important when you go on hikes, clean your shoes before you go on a hike. Clean them when you come out. You can get a boot brush. If you're going into a place that has, the board of John like now, and stilt grass, thank you. So you're walking through some stilt grass, it has seeds on it, you get it in the treads of your shoes, then, you walk into the forest out of Pisgah, you're going through the woods and you're bringing stilt grass in there. So it's really important. Use weed-free seed mixes, soil and mulch. Again, it's gonna be really hard to find them because there aren't a lot of certified weed-free facilities, but it's really important that you understand where your mulch comes from, where your seeds come from, where your plants come from. New sprouts and volunteers, just be on the lookout, monitor, look at your land. Look at your land. If you have land, if you have a forest, you need to walk through it. You need to know what's there. Get a plant ID app on your phone. Learn what the plants are, I recommend picture this. A lot of people like iNaturalist, but just find one that's good because a lot of them make mistakes. Okay, be careful with aquatic plants. This is another thing. People will share water pipes and, these like invasive water plants because they got it in their little pond. Here, take this, like sharing hostas, same thing, not a good idea. If you are sharing plants or you have some sort of, plant share, please don't share invasive plants. Know what the plant is. Ideally, only share native plants. That's what we should be encouraging to grow around here, not these plants that come from halfway around the world. Dispose of invasive plants carefully. The city of Asheville, they tell you not to put vines in there, not to put invasive plants in there, but people do anyway. All of the curbside waste for the city of Asheville goes to the Riverside Stump Dump. Enough said. If you can't part with it, contain it, control it, cage it. So I talk to people about this all the time. They're like, but that big burning bush in front of my house is the only thing that I have that blocks the view of my neighbor. I can't cut it down right now. I can't replace it right now. Contain it. Don't let it go to seed. If you've got something that's going to seed, cut it before it goes to seed. Just if you're gonna keep it, and I don't encourage you to keep it because at some point you're not gonna be able to do whatever you're doing to control it. So just get it, ideally contain it so it doesn't spread. Yes.
I've learned a lot, and probably from you, thank you, about when you remove or put down an invasive plant, how to dispose of it.
Yeah.
But I'm still on a learning curve.
Yeah.
So I see this pamphlet, right there, but, so I'm still trying to figure out, if I got a large volume of stuff, what I have to back and go to the landfill in the bag,
Yeah.
and what can just lay on the side of the woods.
Yeah,
Is there a resource?
great question. Well, I can just give you a quick rundown. So the things I would not leave in a pile, English ivy will reroot, okay? If you've got big plant material like kudzu vines that don't have seeds on them, no problem. Leave them there to be biomass breakdown in the soil. As long as it doesn't have seeds on it, and it's not something that is prone to reroot, then you're okay, just leaving it there, leaving it to lie. I wouldn't leave Tree of Heaven because it's allelopathic. So the story about black walnut, Tree of Heaven is allelopathic. That means it has chemicals in it that poison the soil. They keep other plants from germinating. They're detrimental to the microorganisms in the soil. So things that are allelopathic, you want to get them off your land.
So you go down to your code, you'd actually cut that off to a land.
Yes, currently, yes. I'm working on a solution that is not the landfill, but currently that's the best that we can do, and it goes in with household garbage. Okay, not the mulch pile there. All right, I already talked about all that stuff. Running out of time here. I already talked about this. Except for when you're in the woods, stay on the designated roads and trails, make sure you clean your shoes. And also, if you're getting firewood or hay, make sure it's certified. This is our whole presentation. All right, don't really, so there are things like the woolly eldred, devastating hemlocks. I don't deal with these things. I deal instead with plants, as you know. So lastly, these are some organizations you can turn to for information. Mount True, I mentioned, University of Georgia has a great Center for Invasive Species Research. They have a lot of information online. NASMA, I mentioned, I'm part of that organization. I'm actually speaking there this coming week to all those big land managers to tell them about my projects without chemicals and how they can do that too. We also have North Carolina Invasive Species Council, South Carolina Exotic Pest Council, and the South Carolina Native Plant Society. These are all great organizations to get information from. So I'll leave you with this. The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. Thank you so much.
Good to see you too.
Rick, are you going to